What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive episode number
100.
100. Do you like the cue? I gave you a cue, and you nailed it.
I like that. I'm feeling like I'm like using my left hand or something, trying to write or something, because we're on different sides of the table. We wanted to...
But we were talking before, it actually matches the sign now. We are on our correct sides according to the sign, because my name is Nick and yours is...
Dave.
Okay.
But I think it's interchangeable. But I kind of like that side better. I'm going to be honest. I haven't got used to this side yet.
Well, it's okay. Episode 100, we got to switch it up a little bit for the people. You know what I mean?
Let's do it.
Well,
Okay.
today we're still in our Lenten series called Witness at the Cross. We're talking about the two thieves today, based on Dave's sermon from Sunday. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. You'll get some context for what we're talking about, but we'll jump into it.
Let's
You
do
ready?
it.
All right, Dave, on episode number 100, I don't have any deep, profound question for you or anything, but I do wonder, as we are approaching Easter, and today, as part of our 40 days of sharing, we were collecting they're doing the Easter eggs, and people were talking about what they're going to fill it with. And I was wondering, what's your favorite Easter candy?
I just chocolate.
Just chocolate.
Good old
Anything chocolate.
Yeah, milk chocolate.
How do you feel about Peeps?
All in moderation.
True.
They're not that great.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's like, okay, you got one at Easter, but
Yeah.
they're not as hyped as
Sure.
or they're overly hyped, maybe.
Yeah. So I was thinking about our podcast and how far we've come.
Yeah.
In 100 episodes. And do you remember the very first ones that we did? And
What specifically?
well, I was thinking, we just kind of roll with it now.
Yeah.
But we were getting used to the format of stuff. We would sometimes do it like 2 or 3 times.
Yep.
And I remember Courtney, who's one of our producers, would always say, "Well, how did you think it went?"
Yeah. And we're like, I don't know. We weren't confident enough.
I don't know I never knew what she meant by that. How did you think it went? It was like, can we do better? So
Yeah, we used to go to lunch and talk about through the points and
Right.
and a lot of that stuff. And
So
we
I kind of like this format, but if you sometimes think it's sort of raw and sort of like disjointed, this is the reason we there's no rehearsal, there's no sometimes we do put a little bit of an outline.
Yeah.
But not today.
But not today.
Not today. We're flying without a net.
Now that we've moved to Sundays, it's kind of like, we're coming straight out of the service and basically doing it. So
Yeah.
So Dave, let's jump in for the people out there and kind of give us a rundown of what you talked about, and we'll dive a little deeper into it.
And so just by review, we have this book, Witness at the Cross. It's by this writer, scholar, seminary professor, theologian, Amy Jo Levine. And so it's a great book. It goes into a lot of detail and depth, which I mentioned last week is really helpful for me because it has a lot of background stuff, and I can kind of pick and choose and find some thematic stuff to preach on. So preaching is going well. I mean, I feel like it's the sermon preparation. Teaching it, because I taught my first class Wednesday night, there's a lot of material to go over.
That's what I've been hearing from other teachers too. They're like, this is deep.
Yeah, there's a lot of material.
We actually sold a couple extra books because people who were couples were like, it's just taking me so long to dive through it. I can't give the book up, and then they can't read it. So we're writing another one.
And so anyway, in a nutshell, we're looking at the different characters that were there on Good Friday at the crucifixion. And so the whole series is on one day, and really, just a period of a number of hours, looking at, in some detail and trying to identify who was there and try to get a little bit into their story. And so one of the things that I did today, which I think really applies every week, but particularly this week, is to talk about flat characters. And I had to start off by talking about Flat Stanley.
I've never heard of Flat Stanley.
You never heard of Flat Stanley?
I really haven't. So this was all a learning experience for me.
So Flat Stanley was a children's book, but somebody came up with the Flat Stanley Project. And so there you could write letters to like another school somewhere. And so like if you're in Canton, Georgia, you might have somebody in Paris, France, or somebody in Bremerton, Washington, and you would send, and you would take a picture with your class or with some landmark, and then send it. So Flat Stanley was showing up all over the world. And if you Google it, you'll see pictures of him everywhere. So it'd be kind of, that was sort of Flat Stanley. They did the same thing with John Wesley a few years back, where they had Flat John Wesley, and one church would have it, and then we would send it to a church in Virginia or something. They would have a picture, and you would post it on Facebook or Instagram or something. So it's kind of neat. So, but really, the only reason I used Flat Stanley was to talk about flat characters. Because I've taken creative writing classes, and I took a lot of literature in college and stuff. And so if you're looking at and identifying characters in a book or a play or a movie even, flat characters are those that are just completely one-dimensional. Right. The bully, who is the bully in Back to the Future?
What is
the one that McFly? But anyway, that's a one-dimensional character. He has no depth to him. So sometimes you have those kind of characters. Right. They say that really good literature, really good writing, really good movies, that the characters are more complex than that. And I use a story about, I heard one time that it's better than to change your buts to ands, so that I can say, because a but sort of dismisses somebody. It's like, here is this person, but, here's this person and she did this, but...
Yeah, I was always taught that.
Yeah,
but if they say but, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. So you say, and I virtually disagree with everything she says. But we're more than just one thing. Mm-hmm. And so in this book, I think we're seeing that these characters are more than just one thing. And like the thieves on the cross, we call them the thieves on the cross. It actually says criminals. In one place, it says bandits. I mean, and one other translation. And so we really don't know
what they did.
Yeah. We don't know what their crimes were, but we make them into these one-dimensional kind of people. And so, I think the point is, let's try to get into who they were a little bit more and how they responded to Jesus. And so, that's kind of where we were. Can you think of places where, we could do better with not making people into one-dimensional kind of
people? I mean, I think oftentimes when we tell stories or whatever, we're only considering the one thing about the person that either proves a point or whatever. Like I used to have a friend who, he's one of those people that couldn't lose an argument.
Right.
Because he would just argue stuff. Like he would just start throwing out stuff that I would find as crazy or whatever. You know what I mean? But he only would take that one-dimensional space. You know what I mean? Of like, well, you said this, and this is the only way it could ever be. And you're like, oh, well, this isn't, like, we're talking around the subject. I made this one point, but that's not the only point there is. You know what I mean? I mean, talking politics, talking religion at
theology,
time.
Everything. Yeah. And that's one of the things. I think we've talked about this theme a lot in the podcast, and potentially I must be preaching on it too.
Sure.
And I really try to keep politics out of it, but politics within the church or politics in anything, we tend to, or we could do it with sports. Yeah. There's this person down the street, but he's an Auburn fan. Yeah. So I can't be friends with him because he's an Auburn man. And, but we're probably halfway joking with that, but hopefully, but we could say, there's this person, and they've got all this backstory and lots to give, but they vote differently than I do. They believe this, so therefore they're completely wrong, and I can't have anything to do with them. And I hope we're a little bit better than that. Yeah. But I see that more and more.
I think we've definitely all had cycles at minimum of where we have felt that way about somebody. I mean, even my one of my teenager will come home and say, well, this person did this. They're just such a bully or whatever. And sometimes it's like, well, have you thought about what they're going through or whatever? And not to discount what they did or her feelings about it, but sometimes you're kind of like, there's a whole lot more that you might not know about this person. You know what I mean? Or this teacher or whatever.
Right.
So
if you're writing a story and it's got people in prison or thieves in it or whatever, lots of times people would think of that in a one-dimensional way as a flat character. Yep. And so I brought out a couple of, I think, good examples. One is Les Miserables. Yeah. Jean Valjean is a very complex character. Absolutely. It's a very complex play or book or whatever. But, it's more than just, he was more than just this person who stole bread or stole, from the priest. He became this complex character. And maybe a better example is Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah.
Because that's, all the characters that you get to know. And if you don't know Shawshank Redemption, you should. It's
a great movie.
It's a great movie. I mean, it's probably one of my top 10.
Okay.
You asked me last
Yeah.
week about movies that I could watch over and over again.
Yeah.
I don't know that I could watch it like every week, but once a year I could watch that movie because it's just a beautiful movie, and the story of redemption. There's so much symbolism in it, but there's this character in it whose name is Andy, who actually gets framed for murdering his wife, I think is what it was, and he ends up in Shawshank, and so he's there with all the other people that are in jail. But you hear their stories too, and you realize that they're more than just this thing they did.
Yep.
They're characters, and they have feelings, and they have families, and they're people that are on the outside that love them, and then they have deep regrets, and still have hope. And so all of that, to say, we, as we think about these thieves on the cross, maybe need to consider their humanity. The scripture itself does not give them names.
Yeah.
Church tradition has. And Amy Jo Levine, and I don't know, Dismas and Gaddis, I think those are the two names that they're given.
Yeah.
But that's just church tradition. But I kind of like it that they have names because it humanizes them. They had families, and, we don't know their stories. We don't know what they did. We don't know if they were murderers or insurrectionists, and are considered insurrectionists by the Roman people,
right?
Because there's a lot of that going around, and crucifixion. A lot of people that were crucified because of being considered political, opponents to Rome.
Right.
But we don't know. We don't know. We know that.
All we know is that whatever they did, it ended up there.
The scripture I read this morning used the word criminal. There's another place called, I think they're called thieves or something. She said the best translation is bandit, but that really still is
thief.
Yeah, undefined about what they did.
Yeah.
We do know that one of them said to the other, "Hey, we're guilty. We're here justly.
Right.
Jesus is not." So anyway, these two on the cross. One on the left side and one on the right side. And what the book goes into that I didn't go into in the sermon, but I think bears, is that in the gospel, in John's gospel, just before the crucifixion, there is this scene with this mother and these two of the disciples coming and wanting to sit on, when Jesus comes into his glory, to have, her son sit on the left or the right.
Yeah. And
so there's already been this sort of left and right thing. And then Jesus is told this parable about dividing the sheep and the goats. I read it this morning from about visiting people in prison. But, so there is this left and right. And now you have these thieves on the left and right. And they're that's somehow how we see the divisions taking place. So I do think it is a device in the biblical story of showing the delineation from one to the other,
right?
With one of the left and right. So we kind of think of one as being good and one as being bad, but the truth is they're more complex than that.
Right.
But we do have their response.
Yeah.
What we don't know, the things that we do know is that they were there. We know that they derided Jesus at one point, but we also know that they were witness to all the things that Jesus said on the cross. Mm-hmm. The first one being, "Father, forgive them, for they know what they're doing."
Him.
And so he's talking about that to the people who crucified him. But I really do think that, symbolically, or maybe literally, it extends to all of us.
Yeah.
Because we all have sinned, and we have all stand in need of forgiveness.
Right. Said that, right? Well, we've all sinned, fall short of the glory of God.
That's Romans 8, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we're, now, as they're there, they have very different responses. One looks at Jesus and says, "Hey, you're supposed to be God. Save yourself, man. And while you're at it, save us as well." And he keeps on kind of in the deriding of Jesus. And the other once scolds him and says, hey, what are you doing? Don't you fear God? Because he is recognizing Jesus' divinity even there on the cross and Jesus' innocence there on the cross. And he said, we're here because we deserve it. This man's done nothing wrong. And then he asked Jesus, remember me when you come into your Father. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise.
Yeah.
Today, not next week.
Right.
Not, after the second coming. Today you will be with me in paradise. So there's a lot theologically going on there. You ever heard people talk about, was the thief on the cross saved and stuff like that? You ever heard that discussion a little bit?
I don't think I've directly had that conversation myself with people, but I've heard people talk about it before.
Yeah.
It's like, did that moment get him in heaven? Or
Yeah,
whatever?
because did he profess Jesus as Savior? And,
And actually, the times that I've heard it most are people who want to challenge that. They're like, what? He can just be bad the rest of his life, but that moment, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, that's
right.
kind of the thing.
He didn't confess his sins.
Yeah.
He didn't profess to Jesus. And I think that's where we limit we make the grace of God one-dimensional in that. God looks into a person's heart. God sees the heart, but yet we've made it into this thing. Well, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. He wasn't baptized.
We like things in boxes.
The boxes. So you got to do this A, B, and C to get into the place.
Right.
And I think God is looking at the heart. So so Jesus spoke those words to him, the thief on the cross, and so I think there's some things to be learned from that. Things that we can apply both in how we judge people, but the choices that we make, because every day we have a choice. And Amy Jo Levine does a really good job, I think, about humanizing that these guys are having their worst day. I mean, Jesus is in tremendous pain, but these guys are being crucified. They're in tremendous pain, and sometimes we're not our best selves when we're in pain, right?
That's absolutely
And so you have to throw a little bit of grace the way of the thief who rejected Jesus. But, it's just like this guy's just desperate, dying, but in those moments, the other one sees Jesus for who he is and ask him in. So, but going back to this thing as a way of the left and the right thing, C.S. Lewis wrote this book. I think I might have referred to it before. Have I ever talked about?
I don't think so.
Okay. So it's my favorite C.S. Lewis book.
Yeah.
It's not a very long book as well. It's called The Great Divorce. And I think there's a movie of it out there. I've never seen it, but I think they made it into a dramatized movie. But it's a story. It's not like theology like the book that we're reading. He tells a story and teaches points through it. And it's the story of heaven and hell, and there is this bus that runs from hell to heaven every day. It goes back and forth, and so the people in hell can go to heaven, and there's still grace even after death. That's there for them, but most people choose to go back to hell. And so he goes through several stories and tells different reasons why they went back. One of the most compelling to me was this guy who can't believe, first of all, that he's in hell. And then because he feels like he's done all the right, the things, he's done the sequence A, B, C. Yeah. But he gets there and he meets this guy who he had known, who had stolen from him or done something, and he can't believe that the guy is in heaven. And the guy said, I can't either. I don't deserve to be here. But, late in my life, I by the grace of God, I came to Jesus. And so, I'm here. And the guy was so upset and off-put that this man made it in that he chooses to go back to hell. And so C.S. Lewis makes this point that, the people are in hell because they choose to be there. That the grace of God is available to us and God's love, extends to us. And there's no height nor depth. The Psalm said, if I go to the highest heaven, God is there. If I descend to the lowest parts of hell, God is there. And so God's grace extends to that. Now, a lot of people might take issue with that theology, but I happen to love it. I mean, I think C.S. Lewis is spot on with that. In two senses, not that it's this universal salvation kind of thing, but in that people have a choice, and some people choose hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might not necessarily audibly go, I'll go to hell, but by their actions, by the way they live,
By their heart,
they're
yeah.
making those choices.
The free will that we have,
Yeah.
to choose heaven or hell, they would rather, and it all comes down, if you digest it to its very basis thing, it comes down to pride. The pride is what keeps people from, repentant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing you said in the service that I think would be cool to bring back up here is you were talking about the one dimension, the flat Stanley, but also the thieves. But you kind of looked out at the crowd and said, you're not defined by your biggest mistake.
Right.
And, in kind of my days in doing church work, there's been several instances or several like movements or something that I've seen that have kind of revolved around that idea. Do you remember that one where people were holding up cardboard signs that's like, this is my biggest mistake, and then they flip it around, it's like, but I'm saved by God's grace or something like that.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about a lot of those stories and stuff like that, but also, and I can't remember the band, I was thinking about it for probably the last like 5 to 10 minutes of the service. But there was a band that was playing a song, and on the back of the song, there was this giant whiteboard, and just person after person were coming and writing what they thought of themselves, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the music video, like water just starts falling from above.
I remember that.
And it just
What
starts
was
erasing.
that? Now you've done it to me, Nick.
Yeah, we're going to be thinking about it forever.
I do remember that. That was like in late 90s, early 2000s,
Yes.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I do remember
those
that.
two visuals just kind of kept popping in my head as you were talking about that, because I think so often we do get stuck in our own, like, in the worst parts of ourselves,
We make
because we're like, you
ourselves
don't know me
one-dimensional.
or whatever.
Right. We make
our
ourselves one-dimensional.
Yep.
Like, I am the worst thing that I did. This
Yep.
is who I am, and that is the forgiveness thing. And I told the story of I worked a Kairos weekend one time,
Right.
and I remember this guy. I don't remember his name. His name was Tim, but.
shout out Tim.
Yeah, shout out to him. if by some weird coincidence he's watching this, but he struggled. I mean, he understood. He just could not. He understood that he was forgiven. He just couldn't accept it in himself.
Yeah.
Because what he had done had hurt so many people.
Yep.
And I can't remember what he did. I mean, it was something like abuse. I think it was drug related, quite frankly. But he had broken up his family. It just caused all sorts of heartache to his parents, and he just couldn't forgive himself. And I could quote some scriptures to him and pray with him, but I wish that I had the magic thing to give to him to make him be able to accept it himself. But I think that's everybody's journey.
Yep.
And so I think, falling into the grace of God, and accepting it is a hard thing, and I think if we're perfectly honest, even though we might not find ourselves incarcerated, but I do think we put ourselves into our own kinds of prison with the regrets, with the shame, with things that we have done from the past that we just can't get over. And sometimes we deal with other people too.
Yeah.
They might have asked forgiveness, and they might have moved on, but if they've harmed us and we just can't let it go, we just can't get it past that thing, to give them the forgiveness that we've been given.
Absolutely.
Jesus.
And I find that that's probably more often than not the case of, like, when people can't accept God's forgiveness, it's because first they haven't forgiven themselves.
Right.
And this is not an easy thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of something you kind of have to work through. But I challenge, if somebody's listening is kind of going through that similar thing, is to work through that, because especially as we're talking about this Good Friday time for this whole Lenten season, one of the biggest things he said up there, like you just said, forgive them for they know not what they do.
Right.
And he's saying that to the people who just beat him, to the people who just whipped him, tore his clothes, made fun of him, spit on him, all this stuff. You know what I mean? Like, he said that the people who were doing the worst things they could to him, because that's what they did to people who were crucified. You know what I mean? And he still had the grace to to say those words.
And the power that's there.
And the power. Yep.
And that's that we would think of like, I'm holding this grudge because it feels powerful.
Yeah.
But Jesus showed us the way what true power is in carrying the cross and the grace that is received there.
Right.
So it's not as the world thinks, for sure, but it is, I do think it's the path. It was interesting. I tried to tell this rather quickly because I know we're getting close to time, but there is this parable that Jesus tells about this man that was in debt, just had this incredible debt, he owed, and I think in modern terms, what they said, he was like, like $225 billion or something like that.
Yeah.
It was you could not pay it back.
Right.
And so he goes, his master is going to call in, the receipts, and say, well, you need to pay this back. He says, I possibly can't. He said, have mercy on me. And so he gets the whole debt forgiven, gets wiped out. And then he goes right out and he runs across this man that owes him some money, owes him like $25 or something like that. And he's like the guy says, well, have mercy with me. I don't have it today. And instead, he has him thrown in prison. He's very unmerciful to him. So it's called the parable of the unmerciful servant. And so why would he do that? And, one explanation that I have, it was just because people are complex people, right?
Yeah.
It's just say, well, he was just totally bad. And so look at this evil person. But I think he didn't feel forgiven himself of that debt. So he's still out there foolishly trying to collect $25 to pay off this billions of dollar debt. Yeah. And I think that's what we do sometimes when we hold on to resentment is that we miss the bigger picture of the debt that we've been forgiven.
Man, that's good stuff. Yeah. Well, as we are here kind of at the end, is there anything that you'd add at the last minute? Any updates or newses or
no? We just we continue on in the series, and I will say the 40 days of sharing that we're doing is going well. So far, we've collected some stuff for Kits for Kids, some macaroni and stuff, and this week was another fun one. It was eggs for the kids for the Easter egg hunt. We got some more serious ones. We're going to hear from people from the homeless ministry and. From someone who works with animals that have been abandoned and that sort of thing. So we've got some others coming up. I appreciate his generosity, and it was really cool to see the stuff coming in the corner.
Yeah, it's cool to see it piling up a little more and stuff like that.
So thank you everybody for that, and
very cool.
Keep it up. Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. You've heard this spiel 100 times. If you are watching this, is
literally 100 times.
Literally 100 times. That we post on Facebook, we post on YouTube. If you want to be in conversation with us, drop something in the chats. Let us know that you're watching, and if you have any questions or thoughts about what we've talked about, we'd love to hear them. But other than that, thank you guys for consistently being here. I want to give a quick shout out to our production team, that Tessellation Media with Frankie and Courtney.
Yeah,
they've done this for almost 2 years with us, and really we couldn't do it without them. So thanks to them. If they want to pop up their little graphic or whatever and see if if you're interested, that they're great to work with. So love to give them a shout out, and also the rest of the production team at Hickory Flat with Boker and Derry, and they all make us look good.
Yeah, they do.
So thank you guys for doing that, and thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.
All right, God bless.